branded a witch and left to perish in winter's merciless embrace. Her emaciated form haunts the abandoned farmhouse like a ghost already departed, until rough hands that fell mighty oaks offer unexpected salvation. As whispers of her dark powers reach vengeful ears, what terrible price will be paid when a lone lumberjack dares shield the woman everyone else condemned? Valora Finch's stomach hurt so badly she couldn't stand straight anymore. 3 days without food would do that to anyone, even a woman who had once been the strongest healer in Belwick County. Her thin fingers, blue with cold, fumbled with the latch on the barn door as the December wind threw snow against her face like tiny knives. Inside wasn't much warmer, but at least the wind couldn't reach her here. A mouse scurried across the rotted floorboards, disappearing into a crack. "Even you run from me now," Valora whispered, her voice cracking from disuse. She envied the tiny creature. At least it had a home, a place to hide. Just last month, this barn had stored enough food to last her and Samuel through winter: sacks of flour, potatoes, dried meat, and preserves from their summer garden. Now the shelves stood empty, their contents stolen by the same neighbors who had once praised her healing touch when their children had fevers or their wives struggled in childbirth. Valora limped to the small window, wiping frost from the glass with her sleeve. The farmhouse stood dark and forbidding in the fading light, no smoke rising from its chimney. No point wasting the last pieces of firewood when the cold had already settled so deep in her bones she couldn't remember warmth. The memory rushed back with terrible clarity. Pastor Wells at her door, his normally kind face twisted with disgust, pointing at the small red birthmark beneath her collarbone that peeked above her dress. The devil's kiss, he had called it, after 3 children in town died of fever, despite Valora's desperate efforts to save them with her herbal medicines. "But I've had this mark since birth," she had protested. "You've seen it yourself many times." The pastor's eyes had narrowed. "The devil marks his own early, Mrs. Finch. He's patient." Behind him, the faces of her neighbors. Faces she'd known all her life, hardened with fear and hate. They took everything: food, firewood, Samuel's tools, even her precious book of healing recipes that had been her grandmother's. Samuel had tried to defend her. Her sweet, gentle husband who'd never raised a hand against another living soul stood before their door with his shotgun, telling the crowd to leave his wife alone. They beat him until he couldn't stand, then dragged them both to the town square. The choice was simple: leave Belwick forever or burn at the stake like the witch they believed her to be. They fled that night with only the clothes on their backs and what little food they could carry. Samuel's face was so swollen from the beating he could barely see the road ahead. Still, he held her hand, promising they would start fresh somewhere new. But Samuel never saw that new beginning. The cold, hunger, and his injuries proved too much. 2 weeks into their exile, as they huddled in this abandoned farm 10 miles from Belwick, his breathing grew shallow. By morning, Valora was alone, her tears freezing on her cheeks as she covered her husband's face with his worn coat, unable to dig a proper grave in the frozen ground. Now, 32 days since they'd left Belwick, she'd scratched each one on the barn wall with a rusty nail. Valora wondered if death might be kinder than this endless hunger and cold. Her dress hung from her once sturdy frame like a sack, and her fingers, once nimble enough to stitch the tiniest wounds, now curled uselessly against the cold. She sank to her knees in the moldy hay, clutching her grandmother's silver pendant, the only thing of value she'd managed to hide when they came. If she traded it in the next town, she might get enough food for a week, but the nearest settlement was 15 miles away. In her weakened state, she'd never make it through the snowdrifts. Outside, the wind howled like a wounded animal. Inside, Valora's stomach answered with its own pained cry. She hadn't cried since burying Samuel, but now tears burned behind her eyes. What had she done to deserve such hatred, such abandonment? The door to the barn crashed open, letting in a blast of snow and wind. Valora scrambled backward, heart hammering against her ribs. Had they come to finish what they started? To drag the witch back to Belwick for a proper burning? A massive shadow filled the doorway. Not the mob she feared, but something just as terrifying. A stranger, huge and faceless in the dying light. "Who's there?" demanded a deep voice as rough as tree bark. "This is private property." Valora cowered against the back wall, wondering if starvation might have been better than whatever this giant might do to a woman alone. And yet, what more could she possibly lose? "Please," she whispered, the word barely audible over the wind. "I have nowhere else to go." The figure stepped fully into the barn, pushing the door closed against the storm. As her eyes adjusted, Valora saw he carried an axe over one shoulder, its blade gleaming even in the dim light. His beard was thick and dark, his eyes shadowed beneath a heavy brow. Snowflakes melted in his hair as he studied her with an expression she couldn't read. "You're from Belwick," he said finally. Not a question, but a statement of fact. The name of her former home made Valora flinch. "Not anymore." The man's gaze traveled over her thin frame, taking in her hollow cheeks and tattered dress. Something shifted in his face. Not pity, exactly, but recognition. "When did you last eat?" he asked, setting down his axe. Valora couldn't remember. The days had blurred together in a haze of cold and hunger. "Does it matter?" she asked. The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. The smell hit her before she saw what it contained. Bread, still slightly warm, and a piece of hard cheese. Her stomach clenched painfully, and she had to fight the urge to lunge for it like an animal. "I'm not looking for payment," the man said gruffly, as if reading her thoughts. "Eat." Valora's hand trembled as she reached for the food. "Why would you help me?" The stranger's eyes met hers, blue as river ice but somehow warmer. "Because they burned my mother at the stake when I was 10. For growing plants they didn't understand." 22 years of pride dissolved as Valora tore into the bread, tears streaming down her face. The stranger watched in silence, his massive frame blocking the worst of the draft from the door. When she finished, he spoke again. "My cabin's 3 miles north. It's not much, but there's a fire and more food." He hesitated, then added, "My name is Thorley, Thorley Blackwood." The name meant nothing to her, and yet everything. A person who saw her as human when her own people had named her monster. Someone who offered help when everyone else had turned away. "I'm Valora," she whispered, her voice stronger now. "Valora Finch." Thorley nodded once, then held out a hand rough with calluses. "Can you walk, Valora Finch, or will I need to carry you?" In that moment, facing this stranger with his offered bread and gruff kindness, Valora felt something stir beneath her breastbone, something she thought had died with Samuel. Not hope, she dared not name it that, but perhaps its ghost. And as the blizzard raged outside, she wondered, what twist of fate had sent this lumberjack to her on this of all nights, and what price would she ultimately pay for his mercy? The first step into Thorley Blackwood's cabin stole Valora's breath. Not because it was grand, it wasn't, but because heat wrapped around her like an embrace after so many weeks of bone-deep cold. A fire blazed in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across rough-hewn walls. The small space smelled of pine, smoke, and something bubbling in a pot that made her empty stomach twist with painful need. "Sit," Thorley commanded, gesturing to a chair by the fire. When Valora hesitated, he added more softly, "Please." Her legs nearly buckled as she lowered herself onto the wooden seat. The warmth from the flames made her skin prickle painfully as feeling returned to her frozen limbs. She hadn't realized how close to death she'd truly been until this moment, when its grip began to loosen. Thorley moved about the cabin with surprising grace for such a large man. He ladled steaming broth into a wooden bowl, then placed it on the table beside her with a chunk of dark bread. "Slowly," he warned when she reached for it. "Your stomach will rebel if you rush." Valora forced herself to take small sips, though every instinct screamed at her to gulp it down. The broth was simple venison and wild onions with a few winter herbs, but it might as well have been a feast fit for kings. "Why are you helping me?" she asked between careful spoonfuls. Thorley had settled across from her, his large frame making the chair look child-sized. The firelight caught in his beard, turning the dark strands to copper. For a long moment he didn't answer. Because no one helped us, he said finally, his deep voice barely above a whisper. When they came for my mother. Valora's hand stilled, the spoon halfway to her mouth. You said they burned her. Thorley nodded, his blue eyes fixed on some point beyond the cabin walls, seeing something Valora couldn't. She grew plants for healing, called her a witch when the mayor's son died of fever. I was too small to stop them. The parallels to her own story hung between them, unspoken but unmistakable. And your father? Valora asked, setting down her spoon. Hanged himself 6 months later. Couldn't live with failing to protect her. Thorley's jaw tightened beneath his beard. I was sent to the orphanage in Coldridge until I was big enough to work the timber camps. Valora's throat tightened. This stranger had lived her nightmare long before she had.
I'm sorry.
Thorley's eyes refocused on her face. Don't be. Wasn't your doing. It wasn't my doing in Belwick either, she whispered, the words carrying all the pain of the past months. I tried to save those children. I believe you. 3 simple words, but they loosened something in Valora's chest that had been bound tight since the day they dragged Samuel from their home. Thorley rose and added another log to the fire. Sparks flew upward, bright as stars against the darkness. You can stay here tonight. Tomorrow, if you're stronger, we can talk about what comes next. Next? The concept seemed foreign to Valora. She'd been focused solely on surviving each hour, each day. The future had ceased to exist. Unless you plan to join your husband, Thorley said bluntly. The mention of Samuel sent a shock through her system. How did you? The grave marker outside the barn, Thorley explained. I saw it when I was tracking deer this morning. That's how I knew someone was staying there. Valora stared into her half-empty bowl, watching the broth ripple with her trembling hands. She had fashioned a crude cross from broken fence boards, carving Samuel's name with a nail. It was all she could offer him. I don't want to die, she admitted, surprising herself with the truth of it. Despite everything, some stubborn flame still burned within her, refusing to be extinguished. Thorley nodded, as if her answer satisfied some unasked question. Then you'll need to get your strength back. As if to emphasize his point, he placed another piece of bread beside her bowl. In the silence that followed, Valora became aware of the storm outside, howling around the cabin's sturdy walls. The same wind that had cut through her threadbare clothes like knives now couldn't touch her. Do you live here alone? She asked, glancing around the small space. There were signs of a solitary life. 1 chair by the writing desk, 1 cup beside the wash basin, 1 pillow on the narrow bed built into the corner. Just me, Thorley confirmed. And now you, for as long as you need. The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Valora knew she should feel afraid or at least wary. She was alone in a cabin miles from anywhere with a man she'd just met. But fear required energy she no longer possessed. Besides, her instincts told her Thorley Blackwood was no threat to her. Not in the way that mattered. I can't pay you, she said frankly. They took everything. Thorley's expression darkened. I'm not asking for payment. Everyone wants something, Valora countered, years of hard experience behind the words. Yes, Thorley agreed, surprising her. I want to sleep at night knowing I didn't leave someone to freeze to death when I could have helped. That's all. Valora studied his face, looking for deception and finding none. This man was nothing like the people of Belwick with their smiles that never reached their eyes. His gruffness held more honesty than all their false concern. I was a healer, she said suddenly, needing him to know she hadn't always been this broken thing. People came from 3 counties for my remedies. Before they decided you were responsible for their misfortunes. Thorley finished for her. Valora nodded, throat tight. People fear what they don't understand, Thorley said, rising to check whatever was bubbling in the pot over the fire. And they hate feeling helpless. Easier to blame a woman with knowledge than accept that some sicknesses can't be fought. His insight startled her. This lumberjack with his massive hands and quiet ways saw more clearly than the educated men of Belwick who had condemned her. As Thorley stirred the pot, Valora noticed a long scar running from his wrist up under his rolled sleeve. Without thinking, she reached out when he passed, her fingers brushing the raised tissue. This was badly stitched, she observed, healer's instincts momentarily overriding everything else. Thorley froze at her touch, then slowly lowered his arm so she could see better. Logging accident 2 summers ago. Nearest doctor was a day's ride. Did it myself. Valora traced the jagged line with her fingertip. I could have made this heal cleaner. Less pain afterward. Well, you weren't here then, Thorley said simply. No, Valora agreed, withdrawing her hand. I wasn't. Their eyes met across the small space, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of 2 souls marked by the world's cruelty but not broken by it. The moment shattered as someone pounded on the cabin door, hard enough to rattle the hinges. Valora's heart leapt to her throat as Thorley's expression darkened. He moved swiftly to the corner where his shotgun leaned against the wall. Blackwood, we know you're in there, called a voice Valora recognized with sickening clarity. Silas Pruitt, head of the Belwick Town Council. Open up or we'll break it down. Thorley's eyes met Valora's, reading the terror in her face. The root cellar, he said quietly, pointing to a trapdoor partially hidden by a woven rug. Now, as Valora scrambled to obey, she heard Thorley chamber a round in his shotgun. The sound was both terrifying and comforting. This stranger was prepared to defend her against her persecutors. But would his protection become yet another death she would carry on her conscience? And as she lowered herself into the dark space beneath the cabin floor, clutching the ladder with trembling hands, Valora wondered. Had she escaped one trap only to fall into another, possibly deadlier one? Come out, witch! Silas Pruitt's voice boomed through the floorboards above Valora's head. She pressed herself against the earthen wall of the root cellar, her heart hammering so loudly she feared they might hear it. Jars of preserved vegetables lined the shelves around her, their contents barely visible in the faint light filtering through the cracks in the trapdoor. I don't know what you're talking about, Pruitt. Thorley's deep voice sounded calm, though Valora knew he must be standing just inside his door with the shotgun ready. There's no witch here, just me and my dinner. We tracked her here, another voice insisted. Abel Wells, the pastor's son, followed her tracks through the snow. Then your eyes need checking, Thorley replied. The only tracks out there are mine and the deer I've been hunting. Valora held her breath, hoping they would believe him. She pictured Thorley as she'd last seen him, his massive frame filling the doorway, the firelight gleaming on his shotgun barrel. She barely knew this man, yet he was risking everything to protect her. We have every right to search your property, Blackwood. Pruitt's voice had taken on the self-important tone Valora remembered from town meetings. This woman is dangerous. 3 more children have fallen ill since she disappeared. Must be powerful magic, Thorley said dryly, to cause sickness from miles away. Or maybe your town's just built on a swamp. A scuffle of boots. Then Pruitt's voice dropped to a threatening growl. Step aside, Lumberjack. This isn't your fight. You're trespassing on my land, Thorley answered. That makes it my fight. The sound of the shotgun being raised needed no translation. Valora pressed her fist against her mouth to stifle a gasp. We'll be back, Pruitt warned. With the sheriff next time. Sheriff has no jurisdiction this far out, Thorley replied. But bring him if it makes you feel better. Now get off my property before I decide my dinner needs fresh meat. Heavy footsteps retreated, followed by the angry voices of men forced to back down. Only when the sound of horses faded into the distance did the trapdoor above Valora creak open, revealing Thorley's bearded face. They're gone, he said, extending a hand to help her up. For now. Valora's legs trembled as she climbed back into the cabin's warmth. The food she'd eaten earlier churned in her stomach, threatened by fear to make a reappearance. They'll come back, she whispered, sinking onto the chair by the fire. They always do. Thorley nodded, returning his shotgun to its place in the corner. Not tonight. Storm's picking up again. He gestured toward the window, where snow swirled in the darkness like angry ghosts. We have until morning at least. Morning. The word once meant hope. A new day, fresh possibilities. Now it loomed like an executioner's axe. I should leave, Valora said, though the thought of returning to the killing cold made her body rebel. I've put you in danger already. Thorley's expression hardened. And go where, exactly? Anywhere. Somewhere they won't find me. Even to her own ears, the words sounded hollow. Thorley stoked the fire, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. You wouldn't make it 5 miles in this weather. Better I die alone in the snow than bring death to your door, Valora insisted, rising on shaky legs. Thorley moved with surprising speed for such a large man, blocking her path to the door. My door. My choice who enters and who doesn't. They stood facing each other, neither willing to back down. Valora noticed details about him she'd missed before. A scar running through his right eyebrow, the flecks of gray in his dark beard, though he couldn't be much older than her own 32 years. The way his left hand curled slightly as if it had been broken and hadn't healed quite right. Why fight for a stranger? She asked softly. You don't know me. I know enough, Thorley answered. I know what it means when men with power decide a woman is dangerous. The simple truth in his words broke something loose inside Valora. A dam holding back not just tears but rage. Rage at the unfairness, at Samuel's needless death, at everything that had been stolen from her. They killed my husband, she said, her voice shaking. Not directly. They didn't hang him or shoot him, but they might as well have. They beat him, drove us from our home in winter, knowing what would happen. Thorley didn't offer empty comfort or useless platitudes. Instead, he simply nodded and said, Tell me about him. The request caught Valora off guard. No one had asked about Samuel since his death, as if speaking his name might spread whatever evil they believed she carried. He was a carpenter, she began hesitantly, the best in Belwick. His hands could coax beauty from the most ordinary piece of wood. The memory of those hands, still and cold in death, threatened to choke her, but she pushed on. He loved spring best of all seasons, said it was the world being born again. As she spoke, Thorley moved about the cabin, gathering blankets and adding another log to the fire. The simple tasks gave her space to find her words, to remember Samuel as he had been, not as he ended. He believed in me, she finished quietly. Even at the end, when everyone else turned away. Thorley paused in his work, meeting her eyes across the room. Then honor that belief by surviving. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the cabin's shutters. Inside, something subtle shifted between them, not quite trust, but its beginning. We'll leave at first light, Thorley said, spreading a blanket on the floor beside the hearth. I know places they won't think to look. We, Valora echoed. You won't make it alone, he said simply. And I've been thinking of moving on anyway. The casual way he offered to upend his life for her was almost too much to bear. I can't ask that of you. You didn't ask. I offered. Thorley gestured to the narrow bed built into the wall. Take that tonight. You need real rest. I'll keep watch. Too exhausted to argue further, Valora sank onto the bed. The pillow smelled of pine and wood smoke, Thorley's scent. The blanket was heavy and warm, instantly cocooning her in unexpected comfort. What if they come back before morning? She murmured, already half asleep despite her fear. Then they'll learn why the logging camps called me the bear, Thorley replied, checking the shotgun one last time before settling into the chair by the door. Valora wanted to ask what he meant, but sleep pulled her under, deeper than she'd managed in weeks. Her last conscious thought was that tomorrow would bring either salvation or destruction, and for the first time since Samuel's death, she wasn't facing it alone. In the dark hours before dawn, Thorley moved silently around the cabin, gathering only what they would need: food, ammunition, his sharpest axe, the medicine bundle his mother had taught him to prepare before the townspeople took her. He glanced occasionally at the sleeping woman, noting how the deep lines of pain and hunger had softened somewhat in rest. He had told her the truth earlier. He had been considering moving on. This cabin held too many solitary nights, too many memories of returning to emptiness. But he hadn't planned on leaving with a woman accused of witchcraft, a woman whose eyes held the same haunted look his mother's had all those years ago. As he packed, Thorley wondered what twist of fate had led him to track that deer past the abandoned farm yesterday. What invisible thread had connected his life to Valora Finch's at the exact moment she needed saving? His mother would have called it the work of spirits. The pastor would name it God's will. Thorley had no name for it, but he recognized its weight. Outside, the storm began to ease, stars appearing between racing clouds. Soon it would be light enough to travel. Soon they would leave this place that had been his refuge and his prison for 3 winters. And as the darkness gradually surrendered to dawn, Thorley realized he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. The forest opened before them like a white ocean, endless and treacherous. 2 days had passed since they'd left Thorley's cabin in the half-light of dawn, traveling northwest through pathless woods where few humans ever ventured. Valora's legs burned with each step, but she refused to slow their pace. Every crack of a branch behind them sent her heart racing, convinced that Belwick's men had found their trail. "We'll stop here," Thorley announced, pointing to a rocky outcropping that created a natural shelter from the wind. Lights failing, Valora collapsed gratefully against a fallen log while Thorley set about the business of making camp with practiced efficiency. In 2 days, she had learned that the big man wasted neither words nor movements. Everything he did served a purpose. "Build a fire there," he instructed, indicating a circle of stones someone had arranged long ago. "Small. We don't want smoke rising above the treeline." Valora gathered twigs with frozen fingers, arranging them just as Samuel had taught her during their summer fishing trips. The memory of her husband no longer brought that stabbing pain beneath her ribs. Instead, it felt like the gentle pressure of a hand on her shoulder, a reminder of love rather than loss. As darkness settled around them, the small fire cast dancing shadows across the snow. Thorley returned from setting snares with 2 rabbits already caught. His skills in the forest bordered on uncanny. He read the land like Valora once read her grandmother's herbal guide, intuiting where food would be found, where danger might lurk. "The tracks are gone," he said, settling beside her to skin the rabbits. "Storm covered them. Even if they followed us from the cabin, they'll have lost our trail by now." Relief washed through Valora, though she knew it was temporary. "Where are we going?" she asked, the question she'd been afraid to voice until now. Thorley continued his methodical work with the knife. "My mother's people have a settlement 3 days north of here. Outsiders call them Indians. They call themselves Abenaki." Surprise made Valora look at him more closely. She had assumed his dark coloring came from a life outdoors, but now she noticed the high cheekbones, the slight fold at the corners of his eyes. "Your mother was Abenaki?" she asked. Thorley nodded. "My father was a French trapper. They met when he brought furs to her village. When they married, she came to live near Coldridge, learned his ways." His jaw tightened. Didn't protect her in the end. Understanding bloomed in Valora's mind. That's why they called her a witch, because she used plants and medicines they didn't know. "White man's fear runs deep," Thorley said simply, skewering the rabbit meat on green sticks to roast over the fire. "Fear of what's different, what they can't control. Like a woman who heals without a doctor's training," Valora thought but didn't say. The parallels between Thorley's mother and herself were not lost on her. "Will your mother's people welcome us?" she asked instead. Thorley's expression softened slightly. "My grandmother still lives. She is an elder now. If she accepts you, the others will too. And if she doesn't, then we keep moving." No hesitation, no doubt. Whatever happened, they would face it together. As they ate the rabbit in companionable silence, Valora became aware of how much had changed in just a few days. A week ago, she had been starving and alone, certain of death's approach. Now she sat beside a fire with a full belly and something almost like hope warming her chest. "Thank you," she said suddenly, "for everything." Thorley looked up, caught off guard by the simple gratitude. For a moment, his stoic mask slipped, revealing something vulnerable beneath. "Don't thank me yet," he said gruffly. We've got mountains to cross tomorrow. After they had eaten, Thorley unrolled a bundle of furs for her to sleep on. Rest, he ordered. I'll take first watch. Valora wanted to protest that she could take a turn keeping guard, but exhaustion pulled at her limbs like weights. She wrapped herself in the offered blanket, surprised at how quickly sleep came despite their exposed position. Hours later, something jerked her awake. Not a sound, but its absence. The forest had gone utterly silent. No rustling leaves, no night birds, nothing. Beside her, Thorley was already on his feet, rifle in hand, his body tense as a coiled spring. What is it? She whispered, rising to stand beside him. Not what. Who? Thorley nodded toward the darkness beyond their small fire. We're being watched. Valora peered into the black wall of trees, seeing nothing at first. Then a shadow moved, separated from the night. A figure stepped into the faint glow of their dying fire. A man dressed in furs and leather, his face marked with intricate lines of paint or tattoos. Behind him, two more figures materialized like spirits made flesh. To Valora's surprise, Thorley lowered his rifle and stepped forward, speaking words in a language she didn't understand. The sounds were fluid, nothing like the harsh English or occasional French she'd heard at the trading post near Belwick. The lead figure responded in the same tongue, his stance relaxing slightly. After a brief exchange, he turned his gaze on Valora, dark eyes assessing her with neither hostility nor welcome. What's happening? She whispered to Thorley. These are Abenaki hunters, he explained quietly. They heard of strangers in their winter hunting grounds. They came to see if we were threat or friend. And which are we? Neither yet, Thorley replied. I told them who I am, who my mother and grandmother were. They will take us to the winter camp. The elders will decide. The lead hunter spoke again, gesturing eastward. We go now, Thorley translated. It's not far. Now? In the dark. Valora looked around at their small camp, the meager comforts they'd established. Better to travel in darkness, Thorley said, already gathering their few possessions. Fewer eyes to see us pass. Valora didn't need to ask whose eyes he meant. Belwick's reach might be long, but here in these ancient forests, other powers held sway. Powers older than pastors or town councils. As they followed the silent hunters through moonlit woods, Valora felt as if she'd stepped into another world. One where the rules she'd known all her life no longer applied. Part of her feared what awaited at the Abenaki camp. Another part thrilled at the notion of a place beyond Belwick's influence. The trip took less than an hour. The winter camp appeared suddenly. A cluster of domed structures covered in bark and hides, nestled in a protected valley. Small fires glowed from central openings, sending spirals of smoke into the star-filled sky. Dogs barked in alarm at their approach, quickly hushed by soft commands. People emerged from the dwellings, wrapped in furs against the cold. They gathered silently, watching the strangers with curious but guarded expressions. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed at the sight of Valora's pale skin and light hair. An old woman stepped through the gathered crowd. Despite her years, she walked straight and proud, her silver hair bound in two long braids wrapped with colored thread. Her face was a map of lines and stories, but her eyes were clear and sharp as a hawk's. The woman studied Thorley for a long moment, then reached up to touch his bearded face. She spoke a single word, her voice cracking with emotion. Grandmother, Thorley replied in English, bending to embrace her tiny frame. The old woman's gaze shifted to Valora, who stood awkwardly to one side, acutely aware of her threadbare dress and tangled hair. The scrutiny was intense, as if the elder could see beyond flesh to the soul beneath. Finally, the old woman spoke, looking at Thorley for translation. She asks what burden you carry, Thorley said to Valora. She sees shadow in your eyes. Valora hesitated. How could she explain Belwick, Samuel, the accusations and loss in a way these people would understand? Yet something in the old woman's eyes told her that understanding might come easier here than in the world she'd left behind. Tell her I've been running from people who fear what they don't understand, Valora said carefully. People who called me witch because I tried to heal with plants and herbs. Thorley translated. The old woman listened, then laughed. A sound so unexpected it startled the entire gathering. She spoke rapidly, gesturing toward one of the dwellings. What did she say? Valora asked. The corner of Thorley's mouth lifted in the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him. She said only white men would fear a healer. Here, such gifts are honored. He paused, then added, She says you will stay in her lodge tonight. Tomorrow, she will decide if your heart is true. As the crowd dispersed and Thorley led her toward his grandmother's dwelling, Valora felt something she hadn't experienced since before Samuel's death. The sensation of solid ground beneath her feet, of possibilities stretching beyond mere survival. Yet even as they ducked into the warm interior of the lodge, a new worry gnawed at her. If she found acceptance here, if these people offered refuge, would it mean leaving Thorley behind? And why did that thought bring an ache to her chest that had nothing to do with fear? The sky turned dark as storm clouds gathered above the little cabin. Valora jumped at the sudden bang of the shutters hitting the wall. Her heart beat fast like a scared rabbit's. She rushed to the window and held the wooden frames tight against the howling wind. Something was coming, something worse than the storm. They're gathering in town, Thorley said, his voice low as he stepped through the door. Snow melted off his heavy coat, making puddles on the floor. In his hands he clutched a small sack of cornmeal, all he could get. Heard them talking at the trading post. They blame you for the new sickness in their cows. Valora's fingers found the birthmark beneath her collar. The mark that made people point and whisper. The mark that had cost Samuel his life. How much time do we have? She asked, already moving to gather her few belongings. Thorley shook his head. Not long. A day. Maybe less. Outside, the March winds screamed between the pine trees like a warning. Inside, Valora and Thorley moved with quiet purpose, preparing for a fight they hoped wouldn't come. Valora pulled out a wooden box from beneath her sleeping pallet. Inside lay dried herbs and tiny bottles of medicine she'd made from forest plants. Her fingers trembled as she sorted through them. These simple remedies had once earned her smiles and thanks. Now they were proof of her supposed evil. I should run, she whispered, more to herself than to Thorley. Draw them away from here. Thorley's large hand covered hers, stilling her nervous movements. No, he said firmly. We face this together. The word together hung in the air between them. In the months since Thorley had found her half frozen in the woods, something had grown between them. Fragile as spring's first shoots, but just as determined to live. Valora looked up at him. Really looked. The hard lines of his face had softened when he spoke to her now. His blue eyes, once cold as winter sky, now held warmth when they met hers. Why risk yourself for me? She asked. They have no quarrel with you. Thorley turned away, busying himself with checking the shotgun that hung above the door. Maybe I'm tired of watching good people suffer for others' ignorance. As darkness fell, they worked side by side boarding up windows, setting trip wires around the clearing to warn of approach, and moving food and water to the cellar in case they needed to hide. The simple rhythm of hammering nails and stacking supplies kept the fear at bay. When rain began to fall, beating against the roof like impatient fingers, Valora paused in her work. What if they're right about me? She asked quietly. Thorley looked up from sharpening his hunting knife. What do you mean? What if I am cursed? Everyone around me seems to suffer. Samuel, the children in Belwick, now the livestock. Nonsense, Thorley said firmly. Bad water makes people sick. Hard winters kill cattle. People just want someone to blame. Then why help me? Valora pressed. Why not turn me in and be done with it? Thorley set down his knife and stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the lamplight. For a moment he seemed to struggle with words, his usual confidence faltering. Because, he finally said, I've seen what you are. And what's that? Kind, he said simply. Strong. Worth fighting for. The words hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Valora felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire burning in the hearth. A sudden crash outside broke the moment. Thorley grabbed his shotgun and moved to the door in one swift motion. Valora snatched up the hunting knife, her knuckles white around the handle. "Stay behind me," Thorley whispered as he eased the door open a crack. The rain had turned to sleet, coating the world in a slick layer of ice. Through the curtain of frozen drops, a dark shape moved across the clearing. Too small to be a man, too large to be a fox. "It's a dog," Thorley said, lowering his gun slightly. "Looks half-starved." Valora peered around his shoulder. The animal limped toward the cabin, its ribs showing through matted fur. Blood darkened one of its front paws. "It's hurt," she said, already reaching for her box of remedies. "Could be a trap," Thorley warned. "They might have sent it ahead." Valora hesitated, then shook her head. "No one would harm a dog just to catch me." She pushed past him into the freezing rain. The dog growled weakly as she approached, showing yellow teeth. Valora crouched low, holding out her hand, letting the animal smell her. "It's all right," she murmured. "I won't hurt you." Slowly, the growl faded. The dog sniffed her hand, then gave it a tentative lick. Valora moved closer, examining the wounded paw. A metal trap had sliced deep into the flesh. "Thorley," she called, "I need light." He appeared at her side with a lantern, his free hand still gripping the shotgun as he scanned the tree line. "Make it quick," he said. "We're exposed out here." Valora worked swiftly, cleaning the wound with water from her flask, applying a poultice of yarrow to stop the bleeding, and binding the paw with strips torn from her petticoat. The dog whimpered but didn't bite. "There now," she soothed as she finished. "You're safe." As if understanding her words, the dog pressed its damp head against her hand in a gesture of trust. Something shifted in Valora's chest, a knot of fear loosening just a fraction. Back inside the cabin, the dog curled before the fire, steam rising from its fur as it dried. Thorley watched Valora as she prepared a thin broth for the animal. "You should have left it," he said, though there was no bite in his words. "Just like you should have left me?" she replied with the ghost of a smile. Before Thorley could answer, a distant shout carried through the storm. Then another, and another, the voices of angry men. "They're coming," Thorley said grimly. "Earlier than I expected." Valora's hands stilled on the pot of broth. The dog raised its head, ears pricked toward the sound. "How many?" she asked. Thorley moved to the window, peering through a small gap in the boards. "A dozen, maybe more, carrying torches despite the rain." His jaw tightened. "And they've brought rope." Fear clutched at Valora's throat, threatening to strangle her. The memory of Samuel, pale and shivering with fever as they fled Belwick, flashed before her eyes. She had held his hand until the end, promising him they would find a new home, a new beginning. Another broken promise in a life full of them. "I won't run this time," she said, straightening her spine. "I'm done running." Thorley turned to look at her, really look at her, not as the half-frozen woman he'd rescued in winter, but as the person she had become in his home. In their home. "Then we stand," he said, reaching for her hand. His calloused palm engulfed her smaller one, warming it. Together. The dog rose on unsteady legs and limped to Valora's side, pressing against her skirts as if offering protection. Three outcasts against the world. Outside, the voices grew louder. The snap of branches underfoot, the splash of boots through puddles, the occasional curse as someone slipped on the icy ground. And beneath it all, the steady drumbeat of hate. Witch. Valora closed her eyes, drawing deep breaths to steady herself. When she opened them again, her fear had hardened into something else. Determination. "I have a plan," she said quietly. Thorley raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Let me talk to them." "They're past talking," Thorley argued. "You heard them, they've come for blood." "Not talking to save myself," Valora explained. "To save them." She gestured to her box of remedies. The sickness in their cattle, I think I know what causes it. If I'm right, their children could be next. Understanding dawned in Thorley's eyes. The water, Valora nodded. The same that took Samuel. The same that killed the children before. A pounding at the door cut their conversation short. Thorley Blackwood, shouted a voice they recognized as Silas Pruitt's. Send out the witch and you won't be harmed. Thorley's hand tightened around Valoris. If you're wrong, then at least I'll have tried, she finished. One last time. With a reluctant nod, Thorley released her hand and moved to the door. The dog growled low in its throat as he lifted the bar. Any man who enters with violence in mind will leave feet first, Thorley called through the door. The woman wishes to speak. Those who can listen peaceful-like are welcome to hear. A moment of confused muttering followed his words. Then Pruitt's voice again. No tricks, Blackwood. We want only the witch. Her name, Thorley said with dangerous quiet, is Valora Finch. He swung the door open, standing like a mountain in the frame, the shotgun held ready but pointed at the ground. A message and a warning in one. Beyond him, faces glowed orange in the light of torches. Faces twisted with fear and hatred. Faces Valora had once healed with her remedies. She stepped forward to meet them, the rescued dog limping protectively at her side, unaware that all their lives would change before morning broke. Blood dripped from Thorley's split lip, spattering the wood floor like crimson raindrops. His hands, tied tightly behind his back, had gone numb hours ago. The cabin's main room, once a haven of warmth and safety, now felt like a cage with too many predators. Tell us again how you found her, demanded Sheriff Mills, a man whose badge seemed to give him permission for cruelty rather than justice. At the table, Valora sat rigid, her wrists bound to the chair arms. Her face showed no fear, only a deep, burning anger that made her green eyes gleam in the lamplight. I told you, Thorley said through clenched teeth. She was starving. I helped her. There's no crime in kindness. Kindness to a witch is a crime against God, spat Silas Pruitt, his thin face flushed with righteous fury. My Bessie cow dropped dead yesterday. Fine and healthy 1 minute, dead the next. That's devil's work. Or poison in your stream, Valora said quietly, speaking for the first time since they'd burst into the cabin. The same poison that killed your children last winter. Her words brought silence crashing down. Every man in the room stared at her, some with hatred, some with unease, and a few with the first flickers of doubt. The wounded dog, hiding beneath the table, growled softly at Pruitt when he stepped toward Valora with his hand raised. Shut your mouth, witch. More evil lies. Let her speak, interrupted a new voice. The crowd parted to admit Pastor Thomas Webb, his clothes damp from the rain, his lined face grave. I would hear these claims. Pruitt spluttered. Pastor, surely you don't believe. I believe in evidence, Silas, the pastor said firmly. 3 more children fell ill today. If there's any chance. He nodded to Valora. Speak your piece, woman. Valora straightened in her chair, her gaze moving from face to face. The new mining camp upstream, she began. Have you noticed the water since they arrived? The strange color some mornings? The odd smell? Murmurs spread through the group. The pastor's eyebrows drew together. Go on. They use mercury to separate silver from, or, Valora continued. It seeps into the ground, into the water. First it kills fish, then livestock, then people. Nonsense, Pruitt shouted. She's trying to shift blame for her witchcraft. But others were nodding slowly. The blacksmith, whose forge was near the creek. The miller, who worked with water daily. The doctor, whose face showed dawning horror. The symptoms fit, the doctor admitted reluctantly. Trembling, confusion, stomach pain. She's bewitched you too. Pruitt lunged toward Valora, his face twisted with rage. The dog sprang from beneath the table with a snarl, sinking its teeth into Pruitt's leg. The man howled, kicking wildly as men shouted and scrambled in the suddenly chaotic room. Enough, bellowed Pastor Webb, his voice cutting through the din. He turned to Sheriff Mills. Release her hands. And Thorley's too. But Pastor, the sheriff began. Now, Mills. I'll bear responsibility. As Valora rubbed feeling back into her wrists, the pastor knelt beside her chair. If what you say is true, how do we prove it? Take water samples, she said, from above the mining camp and below. Send them to the university in the city. They can test for poison. That could take weeks, the doctor pointed out. Then stop drinking from the creek until you know, Thorley growled, stretching his freed arms. Surely that's simpler than hanging an innocent woman. A heavy silence fell. The men exchanged glances, some ashamed, others still suspicious. What about our sick? Asked a quiet voice from the back. A woman had entered, Martha Green, whose youngest child was among the newly ill. Valora stood slowly, keeping her movements calm and deliberate. I can help ease their symptoms while we wait for proof. But first you must move them away from the creek water. Use the spring on the East Hill for drinking. Pastor Webb studied her face for a long moment. You would help the very people who came to hang you? I was a healer before I was called a witch, Valora answered simply. That hasn't changed. By dawn, the cabin had transformed into a makeshift clinic. Children with trembling limbs and confused eyes lay on pallets around the fire. Parents who had hours earlier shouted for Valora's death now watched anxiously as she moved from patient to patient, administering teas and poultices from her wooden box of remedies. Thorley worked alongside her, fetching clean water from the untainted spring, building the fire higher to warm the shivering children, his strength a silent support for her gentle skills. The fever's breaking, Valora murmured as she felt a small girl's forehead. She'll sleep easier now. The child's father, the same man who had carried rope to the cabin, nodded wordlessly, eyes downcast with shame. Outside, riders departed for the city with water samples and an urgent message for the mining inspector. Sheriff Mills had gone to confront the mine foreman with their suspicions. Pastor Webb sat at Thorley's table, writing careful notes as Valora described the symptoms of mercury poisoning and the treatments that might help. I was wrong about you, he said quietly when she paused. We all were. Fear makes people see what they expect to see, Valora replied, her hands steady as she crushed willow bark for a pain-relieving tea. And what did Thorley see? The pastor asked, watching the big man as he gently lifted a sick child to drink. A small smile touched Valora's lips. Someone worth saving. As morning light filtered through the cracks in the boarded windows, Silas Pruitt burst through the door, his face ashen. The mine foreman's gone, he announced. Packed up in the night. Left this. He thrust a folded paper toward the pastor. Webb opened it, his expression growing grimmer with each line he read. It's a receipt, he said finally, for payments made to Silas Pruitt in exchange for silence regarding water quality concerns. All eyes turned to Pruitt, who seemed to shrink before them. They said it was just mud stirred up, he whispered. Said it would settle. They paid good money. Money bought with children's lives, Thorley said, his voice deadly quiet. Pruitt fell to his knees. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know. The silence that followed was broken by the whimper of a sick child. Without hesitation, Valora returned to her patient, leaving Pruitt to face the judgment in his neighbor's eyes. Later, as sunset painted the western sky gold and pink, Valora stepped outside for the first moment of quiet she'd had since the night began. The air smelled clean after the rain, fresh with the promise of spring. Thorley joined her, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. You saved them, he said softly. After everything they did. I saved myself too, Valora replied, from becoming what they feared. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. What happens when they're well again? Valora gazed at the distant mountains, considering. Some will be grateful. Some will still fear what they don't understand. That's the way of people. And us? Thorley asked, his voice hesitant in a way she'd never heard before. What's our way? Valora turned to face him fully, seeing the question in his eyes that went beyond words. In answer, She rose on tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. A kiss as gentle as new leaves and as powerful as spring floods. When they parted, Thorley touched her cheek as if she might break. "I'm not a man of many words," he began. "Then don't use words," Valora smiled. "Just stay." "I wasn't planning to go anywhere," he replied, a rare smile transforming his weathered face. Behind them, the cabin door opened. Martha Green stood there, a sleeping child in her arms and tears on her cheeks. "My boy's fever has broken," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't have words enough to thank you." "No thanks needed," Valora assured her. Martha shook her head firmly. "There's plenty needed. Starting with this." She took a deep breath. "The town council meets tomorrow. I aim to tell them we need a proper healer in Belwick. One who knows herbs and remedies." Her eyes held Valora steadily. "Would you consider it? Coming back? There'd be a house for you, for both of you if you wish it." The offer hung in the air like an unexpected gift. Valora glanced at Thorley, seeing the same surprise in his eyes that she felt. We need time to think," she said finally. Martha nodded. "Of course. But know this, what was taken from you unjustly we aim to restore. If you'll let us." As Martha returned inside, Valora leaned against Thorley's solid strength, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "Would you go back?" he asked quietly. "After everything?" Valora considered the question, feeling the weight of the past and the pull of the future in equal measure. "Where would you be?" she asked instead of answering. His arm tightened around her waist. "Wherever you are." In that moment, with night falling gently around them and the sounds of healing within the cabin, Valora understood what true power was. Not the fearsome magic Belwick had accused her of, but the simple, profound ability to forgive, to heal, to begin again. "Then we'll decide together," she said, resting her head against his shoulder. "When the time comes." Above them, a shooting star traced a brilliant path across the sky. Not an omen or a curse, but simply the universe in motion, just as they were. Blood dripped from the thorn scratch on Valora's arm as she bent to pick the wild mint growing near the stream. She didn't wipe it away. Somehow, seeing her own blood in the sunlight reminded her she was truly alive again. 6 months had passed since that terrible winter when Belwick had cast her out to die. "Valora! Someone's coming!" Thorley's deep voice called from the cabin clearing. Valora dropped her gathering basket, heart racing. Ever since the sheriff's visit and Pruitt's arrest, they'd had visitors, but each approaching stranger still made her stomach twist with fear. Through the trees, she spotted a small girl limping beside a worried-looking woman. Not danger then, someone needing help. "My Grace has been burning with fever 3 days, the woman said when Valora reached them. "Folks in town said that you know about healing." The little girl's cheeks blazed with fever, her eyes glassy. Without a word, Valora lifted the child into her arms. "I'm not a witch," Valora said quietly, meeting the mother's eyes. "Just someone who understands plants and their ways." "I don't care what they call you," the woman whispered. "I just want my daughter to live." Inside the cabin, Thorley moved silently, hanging a pot of water over the fire while Valora laid the child on her own bed. Her fingers found the swollen glands in the girl's neck, the hot forehead, the racing pulse. "Willow bark tea first," she murmured to herself. "Then the elderberry syrup." The mother hovered, watching as Valora mixed her remedies. "Everyone in Belwick's talking about you," she said, "about how wrong they were." Valora's hands paused only briefly. "Are they now?" "Martha Caldwell's boy got better after you gave him that cough syrup. The widow Peterson's joints don't pain her so much with your salve." Valora smiled faintly. "And yet you waited 3 days to bring your daughter." The woman looked down. "My husband said. He said we shouldn't trust." "A witch," Valora finished for her. "It's all right. I understand fear." For 3 days, Valora barely slept, bathing the child's burning skin with cool cloths, spooning medicines between her cracked lips. Thorley brought food that neither Valora nor the mother, Sarah was her name, touched. On the morning of the 4th day, Grace's fever broke. You saved her, Sarah wept, clutching Valora's hands. How can I ever repay you? Tell the truth, Valora said simply. That's payment enough. Word spread. A steady stream of people began arriving. A man with a festering wound, twins with whooping cough, a pregnant woman afraid she might lose her baby. Valora helped them all, asking only that they pay what they could. Eggs, cloth, a day's labor for Thorley. You need a proper place to work, Thorley said one evening, watching her strain a poultice at the kitchen table. Not our eating space. Valora looked up, surprised. What did you have in mind? The next day, Thorley began clearing land beside the cabin. Within weeks, a small structure took shape. A healing room with shelves for her remedies, a bed for patients who needed watching, and wide windows to let in light and air. You built me a witch's cottage, Valora teased when it was finished, but her eyes shone with tears of gratitude. I built you a healer's house, Thorley corrected, his calloused thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. That night, for the first time, Valora didn't sleep on her pallet by the fire. Instead, she curled against Thorley's broad chest, his heartbeat steady under her ear. I never thought I'd feel safe again, she whispered into the darkness. His arms tightened around her. You're not just safe, Valora Finch. You're home. Summer brought an unexpected visitor. Pastor Webb from Belwick, the same man who had stood silent when they'd banished her. He came alone, hat in hand, looking older and smaller than Valora remembered. Miss Finch, he said, unable to meet her eyes. I've come to ask forgiveness. Valora said nothing, waiting. We were wrong, I was wrong. Fear made us cruel. He finally looked up. The mining company poisoned our water, not your practices. Did you know? Valora asked quietly. About the mining waste? The pastor shook his head. Not until it was proven. But I knew you weren't responsible for the sickness. I just lacked the courage to stand against the mob. Thorley appeared in the doorway of his workshop, watching carefully, ready to intervene. What do you want from me, Pastor? Valora asked. The town council sent me. They're offering to return your property, to make amends. Something cold settled in Valora's chest. My husband is dead. My reputation was destroyed. And now you think giving back what was wrongfully taken makes it right. No, the pastor said softly. Nothing makes it right, but it's what we can offer. That night, Valora sat on the porch steps, staring at the stars. Thorley joined her, his shoulder warm against hers. Will you go back? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. To Belwick. Valora plucked a blade of grass, twisting it between her fingers. There's nothing for me there but ghosts. Relief softened Thorley's features. And here I have. She looked around at the cabin, the healing house, the garden bursting with life. Everything that matters. The next morning, Valora wrote a letter to the Belwick Council. She would not return, but she would accept payment for her property. Not in money, but in supplies for a proper clinic to serve all the surrounding communities. Including Belwick? Thorley asked as he prepared to deliver the letter. Especially Belwick, Valora said firmly. Sickness doesn't care who was right or wrong, and neither will my medicine. By late August, wagons began arriving with the promised supplies: lumber, glass for windows, proper beds, even medical texts from the city. Men from 3 different towns volunteered to help Thorley build, and women brought food for the workers. On a golden afternoon, as the clinic neared completion, Valora found a moment alone with Thorley. He was fitting a door frame, his shirt dark with sweat, with shavings clinging to his beard. Why did you help me that first day? She asked suddenly. You must have known who I was, what people said. Thorley set down his tools, considering. My mother was like you, a healer. They drove her out of her village when I was a boy. We wandered for years until she died of pneumonia because no one would shelter a witch in winter. His blue eyes found hers. I couldn't save her. But when I saw you, Valora's throat tightened. You saw her. I saw someone who deserved better than cruelty disguised as righteousness. She reached up, her palm against his bearded cheek. You saved me, Thorley Blackwood. His large hand covered hers. And you saved yourself, Valora Finch. I just provided shelter while you remembered your strength. The kiss they shared tasted of sawdust and possibility. That evening, a letter arrived from the county magistrate. The mining company had been shut down permanently. More importantly, the letter officially cleared Valora's name of all accusations of witchcraft. Justice comes late, Thorley remarked, watching her read the formal pardon. But it comes, Valora replied, folding the letter carefully. That's something. The next day, she hung a sign outside her nearly completed clinic. It read simply, Finch Healing House, all welcome. When Eliza Pruitt, daughter of the man who had led the charge against her, arrived suffering from terrible headaches, Valora treated her with the same gentle care she showed everyone. Why are you helping me? The girl asked, bewildered. After what my father did? Valora smoothed the cool cloth on Eliza's forehead. Because healing isn't just about mending bodies. Sometimes it's about mending what lies between us. Is that witch magic? Eliza whispered. Valora smiled. No, child. That's just being human. The first frost painted silver patterns on the clinic windows. Inside, Valora stirred a simmering pot of elder syrup, preparing for winter's inevitable coughs and chills. Outside, Thorley split wood with rhythmic strokes, each chunk landing with a satisfying thud. Neither noticed the approaching wagon until it was nearly upon them. Valora wiped her hands on her apron, squinting at the unexpected visitors. A well-dressed couple and their driver. Is this the Finch Healing House? The woman called, her city accent immediately obvious. It is, Valora replied cautiously. The man helped his wife down from the wagon. I'm Dr. William Thorne from Capital City. This is my wife, Margaret. He glanced at the modest clinic with poorly disguised skepticism. We've heard rather remarkable stories about your treatments. Thorley appeared at Valora's side, axe still in hand. What kind of stories? Margaret Thorne stepped forward. The kind that gave me hope when city doctors offered none. She unwrapped her shawl to reveal an angry red rash covering her neck and jaw. They said it's incurable. Nothing's incurable, Valora said quietly. Some things just haven't found their cure yet. Inside the clinic, Valora examined Margaret's skin while Dr. Thorne watched with professional curiosity. His doubt was clear, but he remained silent as Valora questioned his wife about her diet, her surroundings, the progression of the rash. You've been traveling for treatment? Valora asked, gently probing the inflamed skin. To specialists in 3 cities, Margaret confirmed. William's colleagues call it hysteria manifesting on the skin. Valora's eyes met the doctor's. And what do you call it? I call it maddening, he admitted. I've tried every medical treatment in the literature. Valora nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the answer isn't in books. She reached for a jar on her shelf. This might look like witch's work to you, doctor, but it's simply observation. Your wife's rash looks exactly like what happens when someone touches the sap of the ghost maple and then spends time in sunlight. Dr. Thorne frowned. Ghost maple? It's rare, but it grows near water. The leaves turn blood red in fall. Valora mixed herbs with beeswax. Does your home have red maples near it? Perhaps where you walk daily. Margaret gasped. My garden. We planted ornamental maples last spring. For 3 days, the Thorne stayed in Thorley and Valora's cabin while Margaret's skin began to heal under Valora's treatment. Dr. Thorne spent hours in the clinic, asking questions, taking notes, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to professional respect. You could practice in the city, he told Valora on their final evening. Your knowledge of plant remedies combined with modern medical training, you could help far more people. Valora looked around the simple cabin that had become her sanctuary. I belong here. Then perhaps I could send a medical student to apprentice with you, Dr. Thorne suggested. Someone who could learn your methods and carry them back to benefit our hospital patients. The idea took root over winter. By spring, a young medical student named Edward arrived, full of city learning but humble enough to recognize Valora's wisdom. He was followed by another, then another. The clinic expanded again to accommodate the students and the growing number of patients who traveled days to seek Valora's care. "You've built something remarkable," Thorley observed one evening as they watched their newest apprentice catalog plant specimens. From outcast to teacher, Valora leaned against him. "We built it together." Their peaceful existence faced its greatest test when sickness swept through the region. A wasting fever that struck without warning. For weeks, Valora barely slept, working alongside her students to treat the afflicted. When Thorley himself fell ill, terror gripped her heart. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered, bathing his burning forehead. "Not after everything we've survived." For 7 days, Thorley hovered between life and death. On the 8th morning, his fever broke. Valora, exhausted beyond words, collapsed beside his bed in grateful tears. As the epidemic receded, letters arrived from Belwick. The town had been hit hard with many deaths. Their plea for help was humble, direct. "Will you go?" Edward asked when Valora showed him the letter. "Yes," she said simply, "but not alone." The journey to Belwick felt like traveling backward in time. The town looked smaller than she remembered, the church steeple less imposing. As their wagon rolled down the main street, faces appeared in windows, some familiar, some strange. They set up their temporary clinic in the town hall, the same building where Valora had once stood trial. The irony wasn't lost on her, but there was no time for bitterness. The sick needed care, not grudges. Among the first patients was Silas Pruitt, released from prison and now gaunt with fever. His eyes widened with recognition when Valora approached his bedside. "You," he rasped, "come to watch me die?" "I've come to try to prevent it," Valora replied, her voice steady as she examined him. Later, as she prepared medicine for him, Thorley found her alone. "You don't owe him kindness." "I know." Valora measured herbs carefully. "But I owe myself peace." By the time they left Belwick 2 weeks later, most patients were recovering. Standing before the town council, some faces new, some hauntingly familiar, Valora declined their formal thanks. "Instead of gratitude, I ask for change," she said clearly. "Establish a permanent clinic here. My former student Edward is willing to stay on as your town healer. Support his work, and perhaps next time, fear won't drive your decisions." Back home, as summer ripened into early fall, Valora and Thorley stood in the meadow where they'd cleared ground for a new building, larger than their cabin, with room enough for both of them plus the family they hoped to create. "Sure you want to stay here?" Thorley asked, his arm around her waist. "You could have a grand house in the city now, with all those doctors singing your praises." Valora shook her head, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of promise. "They left me to starve in winter," she said softly. "But here I found nourishment for my soul." Thorley turned her to face him, his weathered hands gentle on her shoulders. "Valora Finch Blackwood," he said, using the name she'd taken when they'd married in the spring. "When I found you, you were half dead from cold and hunger. And now," his smile crinkled the corners of his eyes, "now you feed everyone who comes to your door, with food, with medicine, with hope." Valora stretched up to kiss him as the first star appeared above the pines. "That's not witch magic," she whispered against his lips. "That's just love." And it was enough, more than enough, to sustain them through all the seasons to come.